Welcome to Mystic Sleep Tales. There's no rush here. Whatever occupies your mind today, the little decisions, the unfinished business, the voices that follow you home, none of it is required of you now. You can leave it all behind. You're simply here, and it is very quiet. I will take you to a place where there is no rush. A place where the work of the day slowly comes to an end, like the light fading towards evening, so much so that you only realize it has changed when you look up and notice the room is softer. There will be no haste in this place, nothing sudden, just the slow, unique rhythms of a man sitting on a bench and the sound of the London streets descending into the twilight of an autumn evening in 1886. You don't need to vividly imagine any of it. A soft impression is enough. Like what is seen through a slightly fogged window. Relax your shoulders a little more. Let your hands remain open and motionless if they wish. Now we're going to a very quiet place. The workshop is narrow. It is so narrow that a man standing at the bench with his elbows out to either side could almost touch both walls, though he never does, because a man who has stood at the same bench for 23 years learns the exact width of his own space with a precision that requires no measuring. The walls are close, but they are familiar, and there is a difference between those two things that matters greatly to anyone who works in small rooms. The ceiling is low and stained at its corners with a particular amber brown that accumulates in rooms where a coal fire burns through 9 months of the year and gas jets burn through 12. The single window at the front of the shop faces onto a lane that runs between Holborn and the back of a row of solicitors' offices, and the glass is small-paned, 6 panes to each half of the casement, each pane slightly convex in the middle, where the old glass has shifted under its own slow weight across many decades. When the light comes through on bright mornings, it arrives as a faint warm distortion, bending slightly before it meets the bench. On evenings like this one, when the sky outside has gone the color of pewter after rain, the light does not come through so much as it lingers. A thin gray presence that has done most of its work for the day and is now merely waiting out the last few minutes before the gas takes over entirely. The man at the bench has already lit the gas. He lit it some time ago, perhaps 40 minutes, when the window began to lose its usefulness and the shadow across his work became too broad to ignore. The jet is mounted on a short iron arm that extends from the wall to his left, angled slightly downward toward the bench surface, and it burns with the soft, steady hiss that gas jets make when they're properly adjusted. Not the loud spitting of a poorly fitted mantle, not the thin whistle of insufficient pressure, but the settled, continuous sound of something burning exactly as it was meant to burn. The light it throws is warm and slightly yellow, the color of old linen or very pale honey, and it pools most generously across the center of the bench where the work is falling away in a shadow toward the walls and the high shelf where the brass blanks hang. His name is Edmund Farrow. He is 51 years old, though he does not think of himself as 51. He thinks of himself in terms of his hands. What they are capable of, what they have learned, how many hours of steady work remain in them before the evening claims the day. He has been a keymaker since the age of 14, when he came to this same street as an apprentice to a man named Harcourt who smoked a clay pipe and spoke very little and taught everything through demonstration rather than instruction. Harcourt died in 1871 and left Edmund the lease of the workshop, the bench, the vise, the files, and the practice lock. A plain iron mortise lock in a wooden housing that sat on the right-hand end of the bench, and had sat there ever since, worn smooth on its corners from years of handling. Edmund did not know, when he was 14, that he would spend his life in a room this narrow, doing work this particular. Most of what a person does not know at 14 turns out, in time, to matter very little. He is working now on the final key of the day. It is a brass key, a replica in the language of the trade, meaning it has been made to match an existing key brought in by a customer, a man from one of the larger houses near Gray's and who needed 2 copies made for a backdoor lock, a simple 5-word mortise, nothing unusual about it. Edmund made the first copy earlier in the afternoon without any difficulty. The second copy is the one now in the vise, held at a slight angle that brings the bit, the flat-toothed end of the key, squarely into the light, and Edmund is filing it. He is using a needle file. It is a small thing, perhaps 6 inches long, with a handle of turned hardwood that has darkened over years of use to the color of very strong tea. The working end is tapered to a narrow point and cut with a fine crosshatch of grooves that catch and hold the brass as the file moves across it, removing metal in very small amounts with each stroke. The sound this makes is not loud. It is a dry, fine sound, somewhere between a whisper and a scratch, and it comes in a rhythm that is almost but not quite regular. Edmund pauses occasionally to sight along the key's edge to compare it against the original key, which lies flat on the bench to his left, and then the filing resumes, picking up the same rhythm as before with the ease of a man returning to a thought he briefly set aside. The brass shavings are very small. They collect in a slight depression in the bench surface, a hollow worn into the hardwood by years of exactly this activity, and they gleam there in the gaslight. Not brightly, not like gold, but with the muted shine of metal that has been recently cut, a shine that will dull quickly once it settles. Edmund will brush them into a small tin tray before he leaves. The tray is already half full of the day's accumulated shavings. He has always swept them away at the end rather than during the work, partly out of habit and partly because clearing the shavings at intervals would interrupt the rhythm of the filing, and Edmund values rhythm in small repetitive work above almost everything else. Rhythm is what transforms a mechanical motion into something closer to thought. Without it, work is simply labor. With it, work becomes something one can do without entirely being there. He is not, at this moment, entirely there. Part of him is at the bench, watching the file, feeling the resistance of the brass against the cut grooves, adjusting the angle fractionally when the stroke tells him the pressure is wrong. But another part of him is somewhere quieter and harder to name, somewhere that requires no particular attention to anything, and from which he will return when he needs to, and not before. This is the state of long practice. It is not sleep, and it is not wakefulness. It is the particular quality of mind that develops in people who spend many years doing one thing very carefully over and over until the thing can be done almost without being thought about, at which point thinking and doing become less separate than they were before. A musician arrives there. A bookbinder arrives there. Edmund Farrow, keymaker of a narrow street near Holborn, arrives there each working day sometime after the noon hour, when a morning's alertness has settled into the more sustainable condition of late afternoon attention, and the work takes over from the man rather than the other way around. Outside the window, the lane is wet. It rained earlier in the afternoon. A steady, unhurried rain that lasted perhaps 2 hours, The sort of rain that London produces in October with a kind of institutional regularity, as though the city has a schedule to keep and is simply meeting its obligations. The rain has stopped now, but the lane still carries its evidence in the way wet cobblestones carry it. A surface gloss that catches what little light there is and holds it briefly before it moves on. The sound of the rain was noticeable for a while, a soft percussion against the window glass and on the narrow ledge of the sill, not unpleasant to work to. Then it stopped, and the quiet after was briefly even quieter than the quiet before it had begun. That depth of silence after rain is not a London sound exactly. London is rarely truly silent, even in its quieter lanes at this hour. What one gets instead is a reduction. The city drawing a breath, allowing the more distant sounds to settle, so that what remains is only the nearer, smaller things. The faint hiss of the gas jet, the dry note of the file, the occasional drip from the sill where water is still finding its way down from the roof ledge above, and from further away, perhaps 100 yards or more, the sound of iron-shod wheels on a wet road, muffled and unhurried. Edmund does not think about the rain. He is aware of its aftermath. The slight change in the air, which is cooler and smells of wet stone, but it does not interrupt him. He has worked in this room through every kind of weather that London offers, and weather is simply part of the texture of the day, like the angle of light through the window, like the state of the coal fire in the small iron grate that sits against the back wall. He notices weather the way one notices furniture, as a fixed feature of the room one inhabits, present and unremarkable. There is a comfort in this kind of noticing that is different from the comfort of pleasure or the comfort of warmth, though it is related to both. It is the comfort of a world that behaves as expected, the rain that comes and goes in its season, the gas jet that burns at the same temperature every evening, the bench that is always where it was, the vice that holds as it always holds. A person who works in a room like this, attentive to its textures and rhythms over many years, develops a relationship with the ordinary that is difficult to describe to anyone who has not lived it. Nothing extraordinary is required, nothing dramatic, only the slow, reliable return of the same conditions, day after day, with the small variations that keep the familiar from becoming mere monotony. The day with more rain than yesterday, the afternoon that brings more customers than the morning, the particular quality of late October light through old glass that is not the same as September light or November light, but is distinctly and recognizably the light of this specific month and no other. The file moves. The brass shavings curl away from the key's edge, very small, very fine. Edmund lifts the key from the vise and holds it up, turning it once slowly in the gaslight to examine the bit from the side. There's a ward cut on the upper portion that wants a little more metal removed. He can see it against the light, a fraction of brass still standing where it should be flush. He sets the key back in a vise, tightens the screw with the flat of his palm, and picks up the needle file again. The vise is a bench vise of the kind in common use in small workshops throughout London. Cast iron, with serrated jaws that grip without slipping, mounted to the right-hand side of the bench by bolts whose threads Edmund has kept clean and lightly oiled for over 2 decades. The screw mechanism that opens and closes the jaws works smoothly and without protest. This is not by accident. Edmund oils his tools and his equipment with the consistency of a man who understands that tools kept in good order keep the work in good order, and that the work is everything. There's a small tin of neat's food oil on the shelf to the right of the bench, and it has been there as long as Edmund has been there, though it has been refilled many times. He files slowly now, even more slowly than before, because this final stage of any key requires less force and more patience than everything that preceded it. The roughing is done, the broad shaping of the key, the establishing of the ward cut's basic form. And what remains is the finishing, which is precisely what its name implies. The last very small amounts of metal that stand between the key's current form and its final correct form. Removing too little means the key will not turn the lock. Removing too much means it cannot be added back. In this respect, the finishing of a key is like many things in life that require adjustment. Everything can be taken away, but nothing can be returned once gone. Edmund therefore proceeds with care that borders on ceremony, though he himself would not describe it that way. He would simply say that it is easier to file a little more than to ruin a key. The gas jet hisses. Somewhere outside, footsteps on the wet lane, moving at a moderate pace, neither hurrying nor loitering. They approach from the direction of Holborn, past the window. Edmund does not look up and continue south until they are gone. The sound they leave is only the quiet of their having passed. Edmund has heard 10,000 sets of footsteps pass that window, possibly more. He does not count them and has no interest in counting them, but they have become part of the ambient texture of the workshop in the same way that the sound of the vise or the click of a key being tested in the practice lock have become part of it. They arrive. They pass. The work continues. He stops filing. He removes the key from the vise and compares it carefully against the original, holding both keys in his left hand with the bits aligned at the same end, the way one might hold two sheets of paper to compare them. He turns them to the light. The ward cuts match well now. Not perfectly, not yet, but the remaining difference is small enough that a single careful stroke of the file in the correct place will close it. He puts the original down on the bench and returns the copy to the vise. There is a patience required for work of this kind that cannot be taught in the ordinary sense of teaching. It can be modeled, as Harcourt once modeled it for a 14-year-old Edmund who found the slowness of it deeply uncomfortable and had to learn, gradually and not always willingly, that slowness in this work was not a defect but a tool. That patience was as much an instrument as the file or the vise or the practice lock. You could do this work with impatience, and poor tools would be the result. Or you could do it with patience, and the result would be what it should be, and the customer would go away satisfied, and the key would turn the lock exactly as a key was meant to turn a lock, which was its entire purpose and enough. The file moves once, twice. A very small amount of brass falls to the hollow in the bench surface. Edmund removes the key from the vise, picks up the practice lock with his right hand, and inserts the key into the keyhole. He turns it. The lock opens with a clean, solid click, not tentative, not catching, but immediate and certain, the sound of a mechanism responding correctly to the instrument made for it. He turns the key back. The bolt returns. He turns it once more, just to feel the action, and it is the same. He sets the lock back in its place at the right end of the bench and lays the key flat on the cloth beside the original. They are a matched pair now, and he looks at them for a moment with the particular satisfaction of completion. Not pride exactly, nothing so demonstrative, but a quiet acknowledgement, interior and brief, that the thing has been done as it should be done, and that is enough. Outside, the gas lamp in the lane has come on. He can see its light now through the window glass, multiplied by the wet cobblestones below into a long, wavering reflection. The orange gold of cold gas spread across dark stone. A lamplighter came through earlier, while Edmund was still in the middle of the work, carrying his short ladder and his taper. Edmund noticed the brightening at the window's edge without looking up. The lamp has been burning for perhaps 20 minutes now. He leans back slightly from the bench. Not far. There is not room for a dramatic adjustment of posture in this narrow space, but enough to shift his weight and give his back a moment's rest from the forward inclination that filing requires. His hands rest on the bench edge, one on each side of the cloth where the two keys lie. He looks at the bench, at the tools arranged along its back edge, the files in their rack of 7, ordered from the coarsest to the finest, each in its proper place. The small pot of chalk for marking the key before testing, the 3-cornered scraper, the punch, everything in its order, everything where it was this morning and yesterday morning and the morning before that, as far back as memory goes with any reliability. A workshop like this one is not much to look at from the outside. From a lane, it appears as a single narrow door beside a single narrow window. The door painted dark green in a color that has faded to something between green and gray over the years and never been repainted, because repainting a door requires attention that is not, in Edmund's daily accounting, available. There is a small wooden sign above the door, fixed to the wall on 2 iron hooks, that reads E. Farrow Keys. The letters were painted by Edmund's wife some years ago in careful, measured strokes, and the paint on them is held better than the paint on the door, which may be because she used a better paint, or may be because the sign faces south and catches less rain from the prevailing direction. Edmund has no strong opinion on the matter. The sign does what it needs to do, which is to be legible to anyone who needs a key made, and it is legible, and so it serves its purpose in the way that all well-made things should serve their purposes quietly and without demanding attention. Inside, though, a workshop like this one is more than it appears. It is a room that has accumulated over decades a particular quality of habitation. The quality of a space that has been used for one purpose attentively and continuously for a very long time. You can feel it when you enter. The bench is worn at the edges and oiled in the center. The shelf along the left wall, where the brass blanks hang from small iron hooks, is dark with years of handling. The floor is stone flags, swept each morning and each evening, so the dust in the corners is only the dust of a single day, never more than that. The walls are plaster, painted long ago in a color that was once cream and is now a warm, uneven brown from the warmth of the fire and the gas and the years. The room smells of metal and oil and the dry, papery smell of old wood and something faintly mineral that is the residue of brass filings distributed finely through the air over a very long time. It is a room, in short, that knows what it is for. And there is great restfulness in rooms that know what they are for. Edmund reaches for the small tin tray at the left of the bench and sweeps the day's shavings into it with a short bristle brush. 3 careful strokes across the hollow in the bench, then a single stroke along the edge of the cloth. The shavings fall into the tray with a sound too small to name, the sound of something very light coming to rest. He does not examine them. They are simply the residue of the day's work, the necessary waste of the process, and they go into the tray as they always do, to be emptied on Monday morning when he sweeps the floor, into the tin bucket by the door, and thence to the ash bin in the lane. He straightens the cloth. He replaces the needle file in its position in the rack, the finest file, the seventh position on the right-hand end. He sets the practice lock in the slight indentation at the corner of the bench where it always rests, where the wood has been worn by its weight over many years into something very nearly fitted to its size. Then he stands quietly for a moment, not doing anything in particular, and the workshop holds him in its familiar closeness, and the gas jet hisses, and somewhere down the lane a footstep passes, and the reflected gaslight wavers once on the wet stone outside. This is the end of the working day, not the closing of it. He has not yet put on his coat, has not yet checked the fire, has not yet drawn the blind. But the substantive end, the moment at which the work is done, and what remains is only the gentle unwinding of the day's arrangements, the small practical steps between the work and the leaving. It is a moment Edmund has arrived at 5 days of the week for 23 years, and it always arrives with the same quiet quality, the same brief stillness before the tidying begins, and he has never tried to describe it to anyone because he has never seen any need to describe it. It simply is what it is, which is the end of the day. He looks at the 2 keys lying on the cloth. They're good keys. The customer will be satisfied. They will do what they were made to do, which is to open a door, which is a very simple thing and also a very particular one, since a key that opens the wrong door is not a key for that door at all, and a key that opens the right door does so only because the right amount of material has been removed from the right places, and no more. There is a kind of exactness to the making of a key that Edmund finds genuinely satisfying in a way he might struggle to articulate if pressed, not because the satisfaction is complicated, but because it is so simple as to seem self-evident, and self-evident things are sometimes the hardest to put into words. He sets the file back in the rack with the same unhurried motion and looks at the bench for a moment, not searching for anything, simply looking the way a person looks at a familiar surface after completing a familiar task, receiving, rather than seeking, whatever the surface offers. The bench offers the ordinary details of a working day. The shallow groove worn into the hardwood by the vice's base over more than 20 years. The slight depression, bowl-shaped and smooth, where the shavings collect. The ghost of an ink stain near the left edge, so old and faded that it is more a memory of a mark than a mark itself, from a time when Edmund used to keep a pen at the bench for writing names and order numbers into the ledger, before he moved the ledger to the shelf by the door where it now lives. These are the marks of continuous use, and they are as comfortable to Edmund as the marks of a familiar face. He knows them without thinking about them. They are simply part of the room, part of the bench, part of the accumulated specificity of a place that has been the same place for a very long time. He reaches for the second key, the original brought in by the customer, and compares it once more against its copy, not because there is anything left to compare, the work being done, but because comparison at the end is a habit of the craft, the craftsman's instinct to confirm what he already knows. He holds them side by side, the originals and the copy bow to bow, bit to bit, and they are as alike as hand-cut keys can be, which is very alike but not identical, because hand-cut keys carry in their wards the particular imperceptible variations of a hand and a file and a bench, the slight individuality of human work that no machine, at this point in the progress of such things, has quite managed to eliminate. Edmund's copies are better than most. Better, certainly, than a careless or an inexperienced man's copies, because 23 years of this particular comparison, original to copy, copy to original, has refined his sense of what near enough means to the point where near enough for Edmund Farrow is something closer to correct than most tradesmen would consider strictly necessary. He sets both keys down. He folds his hands on the bench edge for a moment, resting them, and listens without particularly listening to the sounds of the workshop and the lane. The fire, the gas, the slight occasional drip from the sill. No footsteps at this moment. No whiz. Only the interior sounds of a room that is doing what it always does, holding its warmth and its smell and its particular order against the gray October evening outside the window. On the left-hand wall, the brass blanks hang from their hooks in their careful arrangement. Edmund ordered them himself long ago from a supplier in Birmingham who sent them down on the railway in oil paper parcels, 5 or 6 varieties in each parcel, different profiles, different sizes, different weights of brass, suited to different kinds of locks. A blank is a key before it is a key. The correct shape of metal, the correct thickness and length and bow style for a given lock type, but without the ward cuts that will make it work for any particular lock. It has the form of a key, but not yet its function. A blank is a potential, not an actuality. Edmund has always thought of blanks in terms of what they are waiting for, which is work, the filing that will turn the potential into the fact. They hang on their hooks in the order he established for them, which is the order that reflects the kinds of locks most commonly brought to him. The most commonly needed profiles are at the left, nearer to hand. The less common ones are toward the right, where they might wait weeks between uses without causing inconvenience. This arrangement is the result of long observation, of noticing over the years which customers came most often and what they needed and in what proportion. And it is an arrangement arrived at by practice rather than planning. He did not decide one day to organize the blanks in this way. He simply arrived at this arrangement the way one arrives at a habit, by doing things in a certain way enough times that the doing becomes the rule. He thinks, briefly and without particular urgency, about tomorrow's work. There is a lever padlock waiting on the lower shelf. A customer having left it on Wednesday with a note about a missing key and a request for 2 copies. The padlock is an older piece, a well-made English lock, probably from the 1860s, with 4 levers and a quality of construction that suggests it was made for a purpose more serious than a garden shed, perhaps a safe, perhaps a strongbox. Making a key for a lock like that requires taking the impression first, which is a different process from making a copy. The lock must be carefully examined, its levers measured, the key's ward cuts determined from the lock's internal geometry rather than from an existing key. It takes longer. It requires a different order of patience. Edmund is not in a hurry about it. He will begin tomorrow with the padlock and give it the morning, and whatever the afternoon brings will be attended to in its turn. This is the structure of his working days, and it requires no particular management or planning to maintain. The work comes in. The work is done. The next work is there when the first is finished. The bench is always ready, the tools always in their places, the gas always lit when the light fails, and the fire always laid when the morning is cold. In 23 years in this room, the structure has never significantly varied, and he does not anticipate that it will. This is not complacency. It is the knowledge accumulated through long experience that a settled routine is not a limitation on the possible, but a foundation for it. That the work done well requires a stable ground to be done on, and that the ground, in this case, is the workshop and its order and the reliable sequence of the day. The fire in the small grate has settled lower since he last attended to it. There is still warmth in the room. It is not cold, only cooler than midday, but the coals have gone to ash at their edges, and there is no point in adding more at this hour, this late in the afternoon, when he will be leaving within a quarter hour. He leaves the grate as it is. He will rake the ash out tomorrow morning before he lights the fire again, and lay the new coal on the clean iron, and by the time the first customer comes, the room will be warm again without any particular effort on his part beyond the habitual one. The grate itself is a simple Victorian iron piece, relatively plain for its type. A flat front with two small columns, no decorative tiles, no ornamental surround beyond a modest black iron border fixed to the plaster. It does not need to be decorative. It is a working grate in a working room, and what it needs to do is burn coal evenly and hold its heat long enough to make the workshop habitable through a London autumn, and this it does reliably, which is all that is asked of it. Edmund bought coal last week from the merchant 2 streets over, who delivers it in hundredweight sacks on a Wednesday, and the supply in the small coal cupboard built into the alcove to the left of the grate will last approximately another 10 days at his current rate of use. He does not keep particularly detailed accounts of such things, but he has a good sense, arrived at by long habit, of how long a supply of coal lasts in this room in this season, just as he has a good sense of how long a parcel of brass blanks lasts in a busy week, and how many hours of filing a particular gauge of needle file will manage before it needs replacing. These are not calculations he makes consciously. They are simply the accumulated knowledge of a man who has lived and worked in close proximity to a small set of materials for many years. The materials reveal themselves to anyone willing to attend to them consistently, and Edmund has attended. He knows, for instance, that the gas jet in this particular bracket throws slightly more light when the pressure from the mains is high, which tends to happen in the early evening before the gas company's peak load sets in. A phenomenon he has observed for years without giving it a name or a theory, only noticing it and adjusting his expectations of the light accordingly. He knows that the left jaw of the vise holds slightly more firmly than the right, a characteristic he discovered some years ago when a key slipped during filing, and he spent 20 minutes trying to understand why before tracing the cause to a very slight difference in the jaw faces, now compensated for by habit. He knows that the third file from the left in the rack, a flat file, medium cut, responds differently to a pulled stroke than to a pushed one, the pulled stroke being somewhat coarser in its effect on brass than the label might suggest. None of this knowledge was taught to him. All of it was discovered by working with these particular tools, in this particular room, across a span of years long enough to reveal the specific character of each thing. Tools have characters. Rooms have characters. A man who works in one place long enough comes to know the character of his place the way one comes to know the character of a person, not by analysis, but by accumulated exposure, by the slow accumulation of many small moments into something that functions like understanding. He stands for another moment with his hands resting on the bench, and the room around him is very quiet and very warm, and the gas jet hisses its quiet note, and the fire breathes its last warmth into the air from the iron grate, and the brass blanks hang on their hooks on the left wall, and the practice lock sits in its corner, and everything is where it should be, and the day is essentially over. He picks up the 2 finished keys and wraps them carefully in a square of clean cloth. The same gesture, the same square, the same careful fold that he uses for every key that leaves this bench. It is not a ceremony, though it has the quality of one. It is simply the way a thing is done when it is done properly, with the cloth, with the fold, with the care that the object deserves to arrive at its destination unscratched and undamaged. He sets the wrapped keys on the small shelf beside the door, where the jobs ready for collection are always placed, in the order they were completed. The shelf is nearly empty this evening. There was a collection earlier in the afternoon. A woman who came for a set of cabinet keys she had left on Monday, and only 2 parcels remain. The one he has just placed there, and one older parcel from earlier in the week, whose owner has not yet come. Edmund gives no particular thought to the uncollected parcel. People collect when they collect. There's always a reason, and the key will be here when they come for it. He moves to the shelf by the door and opens the ledger, a plain account book, brown-covered, its spine reinforced with a strip of cloth that has been re-glued once and is holding well. It makes the brief entry for the day's work. The customer's name, the lock type, the number of copies made, the price agreed. His handwriting in the ledger is neat and moderately small, the hand of a person who has written the same kinds of entries for many years and long ago, arrived at the most economical form for each piece of information. The date at the top of the page is already written. He writes the date each morning when he opens the ledger, before any work begins, and he adds only the brief particulars of the day's transactions beneath it. This takes perhaps 2 minutes. He returns the ledger to the shelf. He checks that the small cash box is locked, which it is. He locked it before the afternoon's work began, as he always does, keeping the day's receipts secure even in a room he never leaves unlocked. The cash box is a plain iron thing with a simple warded lock, smaller and less elaborate than the locks he works on daily, adequate for a room whose door is locked in any case. He does not think about this. He simply checks the box and finds it locked, as expected. The candle on the shelf beside the ledger is half burnt. He lit it this morning against the possibility of a gas failure, which did not occur, and now it sits with its small hardened drip of wax at the base and its wick dark and cold. He will leave it. He might need it tomorrow or the day after. He straightens the few things on the shelf. The wrapped keys in their correct position, the ledger square to the shelf edge, the candle slightly back from the ledger so that its wax drips. When it eventually drips, will fall onto the shelf rather than onto the cover of the book. These are small adjustments, made without particular thought, the automatic gestures of a person who keeps a neat workspace not as an affectation, but as a practical arrangement that makes the following day's beginning simpler. He moves to the window and looks out at the lane. The gaslight is steady now, its reflection on the cobblestones firm rather than wavering. The wind, which was slight earlier, has dropped further, and the surface of the water in the lane is smooth enough to hold the light without breaking it into ripples. A cat is sitting beneath the lamp, its back to the workshop, apparently studying something in the gap between the paving stones across the lane. Edmund watches it for a moment without any particular thought about it. The cat is simply there, as the lamplight is there, as the whetstones are there. He draws the blind. It is a plain linen blind, cream-colored, or rather, the color that cream becomes after many years of being drawn and released in a room where coal and gas burn. And it fits the window closely enough that very little of the lane's light penetrates it once it is fully down. The workshop becomes at once more contained, more self-sufficient. The outside lane with its lamp and its cat and its wet cobblestones now exists only as a sound rather than a sight. The faint drip from the window ledge, which is almost stopped, the distant sound of iron on wet stone, coming from Holborn, the city going about its evening business. Edmund turns back to the bench. There is very little left to do. He checks the files are in their rack. He moves the chalk pot to its position. He looks once more at the bench surface, running his eye along it in a practiced sweep that confirms the presence of every tool and the absence of anything left out of place. And the bench is as it should be, as it always is at the close of the day. 23 years of this particular sweep of the eye have made it as automatic as breathing and as unremarkable. He turns down the gas jet very slightly. Not off, not yet, but lower, so that the light in the room softens to something closer to a glow than an illumination, the shadows at the walls deepening, the bench surface losing its precise detail and becoming something more general. He does this not from any particular reason, but from long habit. He turns the gas down before he takes his coat from the hook, so that the room is already beginning its gradual settling toward darkness before he leaves it, which is his way of acknowledging, without stating, that the day is over. His coat hangs on an iron hook beside the door, on the inside face of the wall. It is a working coat, a dark brown wool, a little worn at the elbows, a little shortened in the hem from an alteration he had made some years ago when the original length seemed to catch on the bench edge during close work. It is warm, and it fits him as garments fit people who have worn them long enough that the garment has adjusted to the body's habitual angles rather than the other way around. He puts it on. He buttons it slowly for buttons, starting from the bottom in the order he has always buttoned it. He is not in any hurry. There is nowhere to be at any particular time. His wife will have supper when he arrives, which she always does, and the supper will be warm because she knows approximately when to expect him and has done for 23 years, and his arrival will not be remarkable to her or to him. Only familiar in the way that all habitual things are familiar, present and dependable, and, in their dependability, quietly comfortable. He gives the bench a last look. The 2 finished keys are on the shelf by the door, wrapped in their cloth. The practice lock is in its corner. The files are in their rack. The shavings are in their tray. The fire is low but not out. The blind is drawn. Everything is as it should be. He turns off the gas jet. For a moment, the room is very dark, the kind of dark that comes in the first second after a gas jet is extinguished when the eye is not yet adjusted and everything is simply gone. Then, slowly, the residual glow of the dying coals in the grate becomes visible, a deep red-orange at the very bottom of the fire, not enough to illuminate anything, only enough to remind the eye that there is still some warmth in the room. And through the blind, very faintly, the amber goes to the lane's gas lamp. And then the eye does adjust, and the room is not dark so much as dim. A deep, settled dimness in which the shapes of the bench and the shelf and the practice lock are still present, barely, the way things are present in a room that is giving itself over to the end of the day. Edmund opens the door and steps into the lane. The air outside is cooler than the air inside by enough that he feels it as an immediate contrast. A slight sharpening of attention that comes with the change of temperature, a brief waking up that will settle again before he reaches the end of the lane. The cobblestones are still wet underfoot, dark and faintly reflective, and his boots make the particular sound that leather soles make on wet stone. A sound with a slight softness to it that dry stone does not produce, a sound that belongs very specifically to an evening after rain in a London street, in a way that certain sounds belong entirely to their circumstances and would be unrecognizable anywhere else. He locks the workshop door. He uses his own key, a key he made himself many years ago, a brass key of simple but exact construction, no ward cuts more complex than the lock requires, no decoration, no flourish. And the lock operates smoothly as it always does, the bolt engaging with a sound so familiar he does not register consciously, only registers its absence on the rare occasions when he has reason to be concerned about the lock's condition, which has not happened in some years. He removes the key from the lock and puts it in his coat pocket, where it goes with the weight of a thing completely at home in its place. Then he stands for a moment in the lane, the closed workshop door at his back, and breathes the evening air, cool and whetstone-scented, and with the faint coal smoke that hangs over all of London at this hour, coming from 1,000 chimney pots, spreading their particular warmth into the darkening sky. The gas lamp at the end of the lane burns steadily. The cat is gone. The lane is empty. The sky above the rooftops is a deep, layered gray, not quite dark, not quite light, the particular sky of an October evening in a city that has been burning coal all day. On clear evenings at this time of year, a few stars are sometimes visible above the chimneys, but not tonight. Tonight the clouds are low and continuous, the kind of overcast that absorbs rather than reflects the city's light, holding a faint warmth glow above the streets without giving anything specific back. It is not unpleasant. It is simply the sky as it is on evenings like this, and Edmund looks at it briefly before looking back down at the lane. The lane is perhaps 40 feet wide, narrow even by the standards of the side streets in this part of Holborn, a passage rather than a thoroughfare, bordered on both sides by the backs and sides of older buildings that predate the Holborn Viaduct by at least 30 years. The buildings on the far side are 3 stories, brick with wooden sill details in the older style and windows that are slightly irregular in their spacing, built by hand, with handmade bricks by craftsmen who worked without the rigid dimensional standardization that modern construction increasingly employs. Edmund has looked at these buildings most working days for 23 years, and he has never particularly thought about them as buildings, only as the far side of the lane, the boundary of the view from his window. But they are solid and old and still standing in 1886 without any sign of imminent change, and their solidity is part of the lane's general character of permanence. He turns left and walks south toward Holborn. His step is unhurried. The cobblestones are still wet underfoot, dark and slightly slick where the moss that grows between the stones has been freshened by the afternoon's rain, and he picks his way with the automatic air of a person who has walked the same wet cobbles many times and knows which ones tend to be less stable than they appear and which are solid underfoot despite their look. His boots are good boots, solid-soled, resoled once at a cobbler's on High Holborn who does reliable work at a reasonable price. They are not elegant boots, but they are entirely adequate, which is what he requires of them. He reaches the corner where the lane meets the broader street and turns east. Holborn at this hour is moderately busy, not the midday press of traffic, not the morning rush of workers and tradespeople and cart drivers, but the settled evening traffic of a street that has moved past its peak and is now simply maintaining its ordinary life. A few omnibuses going west, their gas lamps lit, the horse's breath showing briefly in the cool air, a costermonger's cart standing at the curb with its owner in conversation with someone Edmund does not recognize, 2 women with baskets walking quickly in the direction of Gray's Inn Road. The sounds of Holborn are the sounds he knows. The iron wheels, the horse hooves on the wet stone, the distant shout of a street vendor winding up the last of the evening's trade, the general murmur of a London street that is large enough to carry all of it without any single sound overwhelming any other. Edmund walks. He is a man of moderate height, moderate build, the build of a person whose work keeps the upper body engaged without producing any particular excess of strength or mass. And he moves through the street with the slight forward lean of a man accustomed to bench work, a posture that has settled into him over years and is now entirely his own. He does not think, as he walks, about any of the things one might expect him to think about. The day's work, the week ahead, the money in the cash box, the padlock waiting on the lower shelf. He simply walks, the way a person walks at the end of a working day when the work is done and the mind is allowed to reduce its activity to what is strictly necessary for navigation and nothing more. But inside the workshop, behind the locked door, behind the linen blind, something continues that does not require him. The coal fire goes on cooling. The brass filings in their tray go on existing. The practice lock sits in its worn corner of the bench, holding in its iron body the memory of every key that has ever been turned in it, every correct fit, every near fit, every deliberate test of a new key against its mechanism, all of it accumulated and stored in the particular wear of the keyhole, in the slight polish of the bolt from years of contact with the turning key. The blanks on the wall shelf hang in their order on their iron hooks, each one a key not yet made, waiting with the patience of metal for the work of some future day. And the gas lamp in the lane burns on, steady and unhurried, its reflection still there on the wet cobblestones long after Edmund Farrow has turned the corner and gone, still making that long amber pattern across the dark stone, still holding what light it holds in the particular way that a gas flame in a London lane in 1886 holds its light, completely and without apparent effort, and as long as it is needed. The street is quiet now, very quiet. The sound of footsteps, when they come, comes from a distance, from Holborn, from the city going about its later business, and they do not come close. The drip from the window ledge above the blind has stopped entirely. The air is still. The lane holds its dampness and its lamplight and its emptiness with the ease of something that knows how to be what it is. Inside the workshop, the coal fire breathes its last little warmth into the room. The files are in their rack. The keys are on the shelf. The practice lock sits in its corner. And the whole narrow room settles, the way rooms settle when the person who inhabits them has gone, into itself, into the patient, particular stillness of space at rest, which is a different quality of stillness from the stillness of a space that is merely empty. This room is not empty. It is full of the residue of the day's work. The smell of brass and oil, the warmth still coming from the grate, the impression in the bench's surface where the day's work has been done, the cloth lying flat on the bench, as it always lies, the chalk pot in its position, the needle file in its position, everything in its position. The day is over. It was a day like the days before it, and it ended the way they ended, with the gas turned off and the door locked and the last key finished well and wrapped in its cloth and set on the shelf to wait. That is all. That is the whole of it. And in its wholeness, in its completeness, in the absolute sufficiency of a day's work done and put away and the room left quiet, there is something very like peace, something very like rest. And if you have been listening to this, following this particular day in this particular narrow room, near Holborn in the autumn of 1886, you may find that your own breathing has slowed somewhat, that the day you carried with you into this moment has grown lighter, or perhaps more distant, or perhaps simply less insistent than it was before, that the familiar quality of a room settling at the end of a day, even a room not your own, even a room from a time not your own, has something in common with the feeling of your own body settling now into warmth and quiet and the prospect of sleep. There is nothing more required of you tonight, nothing that needs attending to before morning. The work is done. The key is made. The lock will open as it should. The lane is wet and still, and the gas lamp burns. And somewhere Edmund Farrow is walking home through the quiet streets, and the workshop behind him rests in its dim warmth, and the whole city is drawing its breath for the evening, and everything is in its proper place. The files in their rack, the keys on the shelf, the blanks on their hooks on the wall, the vise with its smooth screw, the practice lock in its corner, worn on its corners and exactly where it belongs. All of it steady, all of it still, and you are allowed, now, to be still as well. The day has been enough. You have been enough. And what comes next is simply sleep, which needs no preparation and no effort, only the willingness to let everything go quiet. Let it go quiet. Let the images soften. The workshop, the bench, the gaslight on the wet stone, the dry whisper of the file, the click of the lock, the brass shavings in their tray. Let them drift back into the general dark the way all images do when we stop holding them, when we allow the mind to do what the mind will do on its own when left undisturbed. You do not need to hold anything now. The room is resting. The work is done. The key is made, and the key is good, and a door somewhere near grays and will open easily in the morning as a result of the patient, careful work of a man at a bench by gaslight on an autumn evening in 1886, and that is all it was ever meant to do. Sleep well, if you can, and if you find yourself here again, in this quiet lane, in this narrow workshop, at this small bench, know that the gas jet will be burning and the file will be in Edmund Farrow's hand, and the day's last key will be coming slowly into its finished form. And there will be nothing urgent here, and nothing that demands of you more than the willingness to be present and still and let the work go on. Thank you so much for spending this evening here. If you're relaxing in a comfortable place, and this has helped you unwind from the day's fatigue, that's all we hope for. If you'd like to leave a message below in the morning, or if you'd like to return to this channel another night, you can subscribe, like, or comment. Or you could just sleep, which is perfectly fine and probably what you should be doing right now. Remember, tomorrow is the first day of the rest of your life. Good night.